He's Howard Ibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 28 years of experience. Together, Henry and I are the Brief Brothers. We love talking about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising. Well, I tell you what, Henry, today we have some interesting guests, and their names are, well, no, I can't tell you who their names are, but they've worked at, no, I can't tell you where they've worked. They're going to have to tell us all about that. They call themselves Ghost. Let's join the conversation. And this is an absolute first. We're doing something we've never done before. We have mystery guests. They are known as Ghost. And so let me introduce G1, G2, and G3. Now, Henry, you know who these folks are. I'm not going to say if they're men or women. And I know who they are, and they know who they are. At least I hope they do. But they are keeping their identities a secret for a reason. But they're really cool folks, and I'm going to kind of let them tell us why they're being so secretive. But first, let me just say on behalf of Henry and I, G1, G2, G3, Ghost, thank you for being on the Brief Brothers. We're delighted to have you.
Well, thanks for having us. Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Henry.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's get this conversation started. Tell us, we can do this in order, G1 through G3. G1, you can start. Tell us a little bit about who you are, without revealing too much, and why you're going about this in a ghostly fashion.
Well, I'm a creative director. I've been in the business for over 20 years, and we just felt like we love what we do as creators and problem solvers, and we didn't want to go the traditional route as launching a new agency, because everybody's launching a new non-agency, because we don't call ourselves an agency. We're not. We are a team that has come together. We've worked together in the past. We know how to solve problems. And the main thing is we provide something different that most agency-like entities don't do. We get in, we solve the problem, we get the hell out.
And no one sees you.
And nobody sees us. So they only pay for what they get. You work with us, you get us. And no filler, no bureaucracies, no layers, no attitude, no ego, and that's what you get.
Okay, why let me just, play devil's advocate here. Why the obfuscation? Why the disguises?
Well, there's a few reasons. One is at least one of us is on the run from the law. The actual thing is it's very easy to say that you don't have any ego in your agency. It's very easy to put the words out there. We've heard them 100 times. It's very difficult to show that you mean it. And this isn't a way for us to prove that we're serious about it. There's some good things about the industry PR games and the award shows, but I think at the end of the day, they do more harm than good. And this was an opportunity for the three of us to show that we're here to solve the problems, and that's really it, to the point where you can't find out who we are. You can't be concerned about getting lost in our agenda and why we would want to work with someone. So for us, it was a proof point.
G3, why don't you tell us as much as you can about your background?
I've spent way too many years in an agency, like most people that are in this business. I've also had the privilege to spend some time on stages talking about the industry. And this is an opportunity to focus on the craft, focus on solving problems, focus on making things. I came up through the copy side, and I've been a CD and run teams. And I want to get back to making stuff out there that impacts culture and impacts clients in the way that they need.
So you said that you might be, running from the law. You're not associated with WikiLeaks by any chance, are you?
I do not know Edward Snowden.
You mentioned something there, G3, that I wanna probe a little into. Talked about being a creative leader, and now you're part of a team of three, presumably co-equals. And we've actually recently talked on the podcast about the path of a young creative as they go through their career. And at the beginning, you really focus on the work and establishing your style and learning and your craft. And then there comes a point in time where you become an associate creative director and then a creative director, where it really becomes about managing other people and budgets and timelines, and less about you actually doing the work. But it sounds like this is like more of a getting back to doing the work for you guys personally, as opposed to leading others who do the work. Is that a fair assessment?
I would love to jump in on that because that's exactly the point. We are three guys who derive so much joy out of solving problems for clients. This isn't about winning awards. This is about putting the focus strictly on solving business problems, being fast, being good at what we do, knowing we're good at what we do so we don't need awards or accolades for it. You just get in, solve the problem, and get the hell out. The focus belongs on the client and solving their problem.
Boy, are you going to piss off a lot of people. That is just, that's just contrary to what the the attitude is today in the business. It's all about winning awards. It's all about,
Well, I secretly believe they have about 200 categories for the Lions now. You tell me you've won a Lion, I go, great. Is it good enough to win a regional Addy? Probably not.
Yeah, good point. So G2, since you're the last of the three ghosts, tell us a little bit about you and your background, is without revealing anything important.
Well, I've been doing this a long time, and I'm second generation advertising. I was raised by a guy who knew exactly what I was getting into when I went into it, and he wasn't pushing me in that direction. So ironically, I think I got a lot of good advice early that allowed me to form some good habits rather than kind of putting on the beret, if you will. If I were to give you an example, the idea of forging relationships with other departments and agencies, I was always coached to do that very young in my career. And people used to always go, why were you going to lunch with the media lady? Why were you going to lunch with the executive producer? Why were you at lunch with the president? It's because I asked and I wanted to understand the business through their eyes. And when you can understand the business through other people's eyes, it makes you a better problem solver.
I think we've talked about this subject before, Henry. We like to use the word empathy. You know, if you can't see what it is, if you can't see through the eyes of your customer, how do you talk to your customer? And if you are not intimately familiar with what the roles that are being played by your counterparts at an agency, you don't function as a team as well as you could.
And
Now
the same true for the client, right? Like get into
exactly
what makes them tick. So I heard a couple of times the phrase "get in, get out." So get in, solve the problem, get out. Now, and anathema to the typical agency model, which is we want to be on a long-term retainer with you, which kind of speaks to a Sisyphean task that never gets actually completed. However, marketing problems do come up, and they come up all the time. So I presume that this is kind of a differentiator. You would like to have repeat business, but you'd like to do it in a way where the client feels that there's closure at the end of each project, and that you were hired to do something and delivered on it, and that will open the door to repeat business. Does that sound fair?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think the whole point is we're not looking for AORs. We're looking to prove our chops. And if you decide you can't live without us, that's a different conversation.
But it's more than just being asked to come in at the last minute on a pitch. I mean, I'm sure you're going to accept that kind of an assignment, but
right.
Sure, but there's a lot about the industry that is still happening because of momentum, right? The AOR model, I don't believe, and I think G2 and G1 will agree with me that it's not ideal for where things are in the world right now. It's how a lot of agencies are set up. But even if you have an AOR, it's an at-will contract. Even if you have an AOR, every project has to be negotiated again for costs and pricing and all of these things. And it just adds layers of tape and bureaucracy that we don't think we need. So if somebody wants to work with us regularly, great. We'll just, call us when you need us, pick up the phone.
Right. It's also a way of being honest and authentic with our clients. As G2 was saying, he stepped across the lines to partner with media, partner with other departments. And as creatives, I've always believed that the best creative is done when you partner with your clients and you look at them as they're sitting on the same side of the table as you are in a presentation. When it comes to AOR versus project work or project-based work, you can have an AOR relationship that begins, and as soon as it begins, the clock starts to tick until you lose that business, right? And that relationship might last a year, 2 years, but you could have a project-based relationship that can go on for 6, 7, 8 years. Because if you deliver on the project, you deliver a good experience, you deliver solutions that work, they'll call you again. And it's basically the model of, you keep doing good and you keep getting rewarded.
And Howard, I'm sorry, another thing we've talked about, and I just wanted to put it out there. A lot of times there are clients who are having pain points with existing agencies. There's no reason why you can't hire us as ghosts to problem solve. We don't care if our answer ends up going into a major agency and being their campaign. That's not a problem for us.
Okay.
Right?
Well, the question I was going to ask, I kind of know, I think I know the answer to it already, but I'd really like to hear you talk about this. We've got Ghost is comprised of 3 creative director level creatives with, a writer, an art director, and all the stuff that go into what constitutes a great creative team, including, I'm going to guess, well, I know the answer because I know you guys, solid backgrounds in strategy. So when it comes to putting together a brief, is that going to be divided between the 3 of you, or will one of you take that on, or how would you handle that when you get an assignment from a client?
Howard, that's a great question. We have a G4 person who is a planner who is also willing to work with us. So depending on the scope of the project and how big an assignment it is, we're ready to bring in a planner that has every bit as much of experience as a planner as we do as creatives. So, but you're right. I think when you've done it as long as I have, you develop a good nose for strategy. And I often think that the people who end up having good long careers in this business, it's because they're able to be strategic. And some of it is even just separating your ego. It's not about getting to the south of France. It's about problem solving and putting food in the fridge.
And I think too that regardless of how you start in this industry, the further you progress, the closer you get to account services and strategy. If you go higher up that ladder, as you were saying, Henry, it becomes less about the craft and more about the management and the understanding of business. And I think that that's really where, when done correctly, account services strategy comes in. So the things we feel comfortable to handle among the 3 of us, we will. And the things that don't, we can summon another specter.
So
as G2, go ahead. I was just going to add to that what G2 was mentioning.
Go ahead.
What I was mentioning, what I wanted to piggyback on what G2 was saying is that there is a G4, which we have vetted, and this person is a phenomenal strategic talent. But as we as creatives become more versed in strategy and all the other business sides of it, this strategy counterpart, who is G4, is also a very creative person. So while their background started in strategy and strategic planning, they are also very creative as well.
Well,
So there's a lot of overlap.
And the other thing is you wouldn't really expect G1 to say this about himself because he's an art director and a designer by trade, but I've worked with him enough to where he's a writer. We're all writers, we're all visual thinkers, we're all problem solvers. There really aren't any tidy little definitions, or there are no walls between the disciplines as far as we're concerned, because when you're working fast and you're really trying to solve problems, you don't have time for the ego and you don't have time to be protective about things. It's about getting to the answer, and it doesn't matter who it comes from as long as it's right.
I think what you're alluding to is something that's frequently referenced even within the traditional agency model, but not often lived up to, right? Which is that idea of you don't have to be so zealous of your boundaries, right? If the strategist has a good idea, what the hell? Why not go with that idea? You know, if it's beating whatever the junior copywriter came up with on the assignment. So I definitely, I think what it ladders up to is you guys have been around enough. You've been in this business enough that none of that other side stuff matters, right? So
well, Henry, I got to disagree with you on that one. I mean, I've worked in big shops, legacy agencies, and let me tell you, there's turf wars.
I'm saying they do exist. I'm saying they do exist. But
if wishing made it so, that it wouldn't. But
yeah, the mantra is a good idea can come from anyone, but in reality, it doesn't work that way.
Exactly.
But we've all had also experiences with people who are gracious and smart, and you know, I'm the first one. I'll take an idea on board from wherever it comes from, and promote the shit out of it. I frequently I work on an account today that I've been working on for the last 6 years. And when I started working on that account, there was a young junior account person who told me how he viewed the brand. And I've repeated that anecdote like to people at the highest levels at this client, because it was smart and the kid knew what he was talking about. So and I always say, hey, there was a guy that worked on your business many years ago, was a junior guy who said this, and it's true about your brand. And they all leave their head scratches like, that is true about our brand. So,
I mean, I remember probably midway in my career that I was working with a very talented strategist, and they condensed the brief at the end of the document probably into a single line that was supposed to be the guiding light for the creative department. We couldn't beat the line. They just they found it out in that briefing, and come through the end of the project. You know, you try because that's your job.
Well,
but truly your job is what's best for the business, what's best for the client. And we all looked at it and said, yeah, those are the words.
Yeah, I sure wouldn't want to be the guy who tried to rewrite Drivers Wanted.
Right.
You know, and I think part of it, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Howard. It's about being adult enough to recognize when a great idea falls in front of you. Here's the interesting thing that I find. I believe a great idea can come from anybody, but that doesn't mean the person it comes from gets to execute it.
Oh, absolutely. No, you know, when you come across that kind of a situation where it's a line that's on a brief, maybe it becomes public facing, maybe it becomes the brand's slogan or tagline, or maybe it becomes a lead-off headline for a campaign, and you can't beat it. And that's great. But can you add on to it? Can you give it life beyond that? That's where, you know, brilliant minds like yours come to the party and say, what else can we do? And that's where that's a junior team can't replicate that.
Yeah, I think that's true. And because I always use it I already use it as a reference. I'm going to talk about Drivers Wanted for a minute, right? The line that they launched the campaign with was, on the road of life, there are drivers and there are passengers, period, Drivers Wanted. What to me made it so brilliant is that they built that on-ramp to get people to understand they were selling the idea of German engineering, and then they erased the front of the line and it became Drivers Wanted. I think it's one of the most elegant ways that a campaign was ever seeded. It wouldn't surprise me a bit if Drivers Wanted appeared in the brief, but maybe a creative person had the presence of mind to write the front end on it, right?
Yeah.
But I could see just as easily that same story playing out for Avis, right? The classic,
right.
We try harder. Right? That got launched with a long copy ad that the point of it was you had to read to understand why it was great to be number 2.
Yeah.
But then it became just
Took on a life of
we
its
try
own.
harder.
Yeah. So quick question. What's the source of business predominantly going to be? You think it's going to be direct from client or I imagine you guys would be open to working with agencies that are looking for freelance, short-term pitches, stuff like that.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
100%.
it can come
All
from
of the
either.
above.
I think for me, if it came half from client side, that would make me very happy, because I think there's so many bad habits that agencies fall into that we plan on skipping, including thinking that our ectoplasm doesn't stink. You're allowed to be wrong when you're moving fast. I think being able to pivot fast and go, oh, okay, understand your point. We'll be back in front of you in a couple of days with a better answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think to your point, there's an entire culture built within an agency that everything is like the ultimate test. And if you fail that test, everybody, is in the shitters, they're in the dumps, right? Like we had the big presentation and they didn't buy anything. Oh my God. Oh, and you guys are saying we've been around the block. If they don't buy, we'll come back in a couple of days and they'll buy something.
Well, I've had too many times have it be that when I had my greatest successes, it was when they were on round 3 or 4 when all the other creatives went home.
Right.
Yeah,
Henry, you bring up a good point. I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
You bring up a good point, Henry, with the client and the presentations, because it's something that we are, as you mentioned, the agency model and the culture, there's certain things that are innate in agencies. And the one thing that we're solving is, and we've all seen it, we've all been there before, is the client presentation goes well, they award the business, and then 3 weeks later, there's new people working on the business that never pitched them in the first place. It's like we're the people that won us over, right? We want to work with them.
And more times
also,
and more times than not. Sorry.
Go ahead.
And more times than not, the group that was involved in winning them over is so busy touting their accomplishment on LinkedIn. It really shouldn't be about that, right? Well, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be.
No, I think a great example that I like to point to is the conversation I had with Sarah Walker Hall some months ago about a brief she wrote 20 years earlier, 2003, something like that. She had been a brand new she was a brand new strategist with the Richards Group. We call it TRG now, but back then she was part of the team that pitched the business from Kiwi Shoe Polish and won it from, I don't even know who the agency was. And she wrote the brief that we talk about all the time, the Kiwi brief, for their first outdoor campaign. And she was intimately involved with that. So she was part of the team that pitched the business. She was the strategist who wrote the brief for the first campaign, and I don't know how many others, but that campaign went on to win all kinds of awards for creativity, but it was also submitted into a case study for the brief itself. I think it won a silver in whatever the competition was. So there's an example of a strategist who's part of the pitch and part of the team and stayed with it, throughout the course.
Yeah.
Ideally,
that's what clients get, right? You present a team and that's the team they get. Unfortunately, in a lot of cases, especially with big agencies, they end up getting a B team or a C team to manage their day-to-day work.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I was gonna say there's another piece of that as well, which is that many times you were talking about the pitch and the agency obsession presentation. Sometimes things just need to be solved by a phone call. Like some of these things get made into mountains when they're only molehills. And the
What? Not in
benefit,
our business. Are you kidding me? Come on.
the benefit of knowing that when you work with us, you get us is also when you have a question, you don't have to worry about whisper down the link. You don't have to
Right.
worry about a game of telephone. If we have a question or you have a question, direct back and forth. Let's cut this as simply as possible, as quickly as possible, and figure out what we need. Because I mean, I've lost count the number of times that I've working for an agency have been in a situation where people feel the need to go into the meeting and explain why something has changed. And the client walks into the meeting with no idea that they're seeing something different than what was promised previously, which is an absurd way to operate. Just somebody pick up the phone and say, you know, we've been giving this a try, but A, B, and C are why we think it's not working. We talk about it. Get much further, much faster.
Is Ghost so new that you don't have any clients yet, or have you been working with clients as Ghost? And if you have one or two clients, what has been their reaction to working with this kind of a setup?
At this stage, we've all.
G2, why don't you take that?
Well, to answer the question, we're very close. We're very close to having a client who we think could be a project for Ghost for at least 6 months, maybe a year. It would be premature to say they're a client, and plus it's really not Ghost's agenda to play it that way. But I think one of the goals for us is by not wanting an AOR relationship, we are in essence managing our growth. And we think when we find that partner that we really connect with, it's going to be obvious to everybody that we need to figure out a way to work longer together. But it's not about growing to be big. It's about keeping small. It's about having our hands on all the work. And if we get to the point where we can't touch the work, then I think the choice we have to make is we probably have to send a client down the road.
Can you say, G2, what the conversation with this potential client has been like, given the unique nature of who and what you are?
Well, I'll give you an interesting.
It involved an Ouija board.
Say that again. I missed that.
It involved a Ouija board.
Yeah, the funniest thing I can tell you is when they learned we weren't looking for an AOR, we became 10 times more interesting than people who were chasing them all around the block.
That seems to me to be the most logical thing that conclusion that I would draw, is that all of a sudden they can relax and say, oh, okay, you don't want that. So that just kind of frees me up as a client to say, let me try you out. And if you can solve my problems, maybe you'll come back.
Well, Howard, there's a huge benefit to not being an agency of record. Not being an agency of record, because there's a lot of loopholes and hoops that clients and brands have to jump through to bring you on board as a certified vendor. When you are coming in as a project, we can alleviate all those layers that kind of delay the process. They bring us in. We're just a vendor you bring in, we solve the problem, and we're out. We don't have to go through the bureaucratic layers of becoming an approved vendor, going up the chain to the CMO, the presidents, and the board.
Yeah, you're just pissing off all those holding companies with this kind of talk.
But I think Henry had a question, right?
Yeah, but we're gonna hold the shit out of him.
Yeah, you mentioned an interesting thing about not necessarily having to go all the way up the flagpole, because it's not going to be an AOR hire, but there's also it also works in downward, right? Because you guys are 3 accomplished senior creatives who have done a lot of noteworthy work, and what happens in a typical agency relationship is that there's this whole edifice of layers of people that interact with layers of people at the client side, and they kind of mirror each other. And so at a certain point, you guys are working with senior marketers, right? Like people who would know who you are and really cut out a lot of those middlemen that are in that game of telephone that we were talking about earlier. You know, all this protocol of account service and the meeting reports and the formality and all that. And I would imagine that your ideal client from the client side is like a CMO level or director of advertising director, marketing director level person. You're not dealing with, like, you know, these layers of junior people, like, which I think also cuts a lot of the, not only the formality, but a lot of the bullshit. Like, to your point earlier about, like,
Right.
hey, we have this problem, like, you can relate to them on a one-on-one basis. I had recently a challenge with a client that they didn't buy something, and people were having a hard time interpreting the feedback, and I had my own interpretation of the feedback and which direction to take it in, but I didn't want to, we didn't have time. And I just reached out directly to the senior client, like violating all kinds of protocol on the client side and at the agency. And the guy said, no, you're absolutely right. What you're saying right now to me is the right thing to do. And we went back, we did the work, we came back and we sold it. And because finding time on this person's calendar was extremely at a premium, right?
Well,
But now all of
right.
a sudden, because I cut all those
Right.
people out of the way, I was able to solve the problem.
Think
Hey,
about
Henry,
the
I
hour.
got-
Think about the hours you saved your client and the hours you saved your creatives.
Henry,
Yeah.
I have an exact story just like that. At a previous agency of mine, you know, we had the typical layers of, you know, account coordinators, account executives, all the way up to senior. And we were midway through a project, and I had a very important question I wanted to ask the client. And I asked the account coordinator, who has been an account person in advertising for all of 7 months. I had been in the business for about 15 plus years. And I said, can you please give me such and such as contact information? I have to ask her a question. I had to, this account person had to schedule a meeting, make sure the account director was available. The meeting happened 2 days later for me to ask a question to a client. That is so inefficient for anyone to get any kind of work done. And you know, you need to be able to have ready access to the people who are working on your business. We have to have access to the clients we're trying to help, you know, problem solve. And the main thing is when you have that relationship where you can pick up the phone or you could reach out in an email, there becomes a more genuine relationship there where you become a better listener to what clients are actually trying to tell you versus thinking you know what the clients want to say. But when you actually listen and become that partner to them, you can call them, you listen to them, they get it, they know that they can trust that you are a partner for them.
Presumably cutting out all these middlemen and all of this bullshit, right? And presents a value proposition to the clients as well, right? They're not paying for all that. They're not paying for healthcare for 100 people that are working on their account, right? They're paying the 3 people that are actually solving the creative, or potentially 4th, to solve the problem.
And people who have been doing this long enough that speed is a privilege for us all. There's the simple truth is that you can have an incredibly gifted junior or mid-level team. If you haven't lived and breathed this stuff for a couple of decades, they're gonna move slower. And so for us, yes, there's the experience and the level of expertise that we've established, but that with that comes speed. And spend a day to get it right, as opposed to 6 months of back and forth at a lower rate, and hopefully it comes out by then.
Yeah, G2, did you want to add something to that?
I just think one of the shifts that the guys and I have been talking about is it isn't about us beating Can. That's not what this is about. It's about getting in there and providing the right answer we're not competing against agencies, we're competing against mediocrity. And mediocrity
Yeah.
is everywhere.
And that's really something I wanted to discuss, because to me, this model that you are establishing, I don't know if it's unique, but it's certainly rare. And that is that if you're paying attention to some of the discussions you see on LinkedIn, I'm not on Twitter or X, so I can't comment there, but I see a lot of comments on Twitter about the threats of certain new technology and how that's going to have an impact on me as a creative or me as an agency. And we all know it's really centered around AI. And there's a lot of lamenting going on about, I can't find work. The agencies don't care about people once they hit a certain age, they're laying them off. What you guys are doing is thumbing your noses to that whole concept and saying, I've got all this experience, I'm putting it to use, we're putting ourselves out there, and we're already starting to get good response. So don't give me this bullshit about my career is over. I'm taking control.
I think
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah. I think the problem with AI is not, setting aside the wholesale thievery of creativity in the process of making it. The problem with AI in the creative industry is that it is not that it's going to replace the people who want to make stuff. The problem is that it's going to continue to devalue the craft of solving problems and making things. And frankly, the agency model has had a head start on that for 15, 20 years. I mean, it's just keep trying to sell things for less and less, and fighting with the new digital stuff, that every time there's a new digital creative, right, a new digital format, we'll offer it cheaper to bring people in. And then I hope to God that we can get them to buy a TV spot. Well, nobody's buying TV spots anymore, not for the price that they used to. And now the profit margins disappeared. Yeah. So I think it's the same problem. There's going to be people out there who say, clients who say, well, I can push a button and it made a whole bunch of banners for me. I'm done. And I don't know that we should chase those people at all.
Yeah.
The other thing we're investing in is the belief that there are still people out there that understand the value of what we do.
I have a narrative that I share regarding this exact point, which is, over time, right, we've got all this technology available to us. Like I have iMovie on my laptop that we're talking on, and I edit this podcast on that, and our clients edit their home movies on that, and they kind of think we've devalued, like, to do the work really well, it's not just a matter of slapping something together, an iMovie on a home laptop. Right. And so we've kind of devalued, because the tools make it look so polished. We've devalued actually the idea. So I think that that's also true with AI. I think the best creatives will find a way to use AI to their advantage, and mediocre people will just have AI do the work, and to your point, generate a bunch of banners or a video or whatever it is down the road.
But that's always been the case, Henry. It's always been the case. It's this whole idea about the bell curve. 99.9% of the stuff out there is crap. That was true in 1950. That was true in 1960, in the so-called golden age of advertising. If you go back and look at the vast majority of advertising in 1960s, when Howard Ibach was doing his thing, and when Bill Bernbach was doing his thing, there was still mostly crap out there. It's just that when the brilliant stuff comes around, we notice it.
Well, I love, somebody was having this conversation a couple months ago with someone, and they said it's the classic rock radio example, where when you're listening to the stuff that came from the decades before, they're only playing the hits. So you sit there and think, oh man, every song was amazing in that decade. Right?
Only the ones that made the top 40.
Right. Exactly.
And they're played over and over and over again. Right.
Nobody's showing the ads that ran alongside the Volkswagen's Lemon talking about what an incredible year it was for advertising, because nobody can even find that trash.
Oh, well,
but the
I
trash
tell you-
was there.
You know, G3, I have my great aunt who lived in Alma, Wisconsin, population 800, Mississippi River town, was a hoarder. And she kept old newspapers from the late 19th century. And I've still got a few of them. And you just got, and you know, they were huge, these gigantic formatted newspapers.
Right.
You flip through them and you've got
Broadsheets.
these little tiny little ads, and you got the big space ads. That's all there were in those days.
Right.
And there isn't a one that would put in, you would put in anybody's portfolio. You just wouldn't. They're charming now because they're quaint. They're just, oh, aren't they cute? But they're not anything that we would call good advertising. And that's an example.
So
What G3 brings up is an interesting point in the way marketing and advertising is done right now. Right now, it's about how many tactics can you bang out and wallpaper society with. What's missing right now are ideas, and you can have the delivery device and the tactics, but right now everything is devoid of an idea, and that's what we do. We are idea people. We come up with the ideas, the concepts that are going to grab people's attention, so those other assets can be as effective as they can.
Oh, and I think one of the great ironies of agencies as they exist now is that nobody has time to deep think. Nobody. But when we get, oftentimes when G1 and I work on assignments together, we realize we're given the luxury of deep thinking because we haven't got 1,000 other things to deliver. It's one simple ask. And, you know, we aren't afraid to put our nose to the grindstone. And, you know, somebody pays us for a day. We think for a day. And when you think for a day without stupid interruptions and without people getting in your face, it's amazing how much work you can generate.
All right, G2, I'm going to call you on that because you and I both know that a day for you and G1 is the equivalent of 2 weeks for a junior team. Because your muscle memory is so well honed that you can create an idea
I think that's part of the value proposition. And
absolutely.
That's fair.
And I would say, I mean, it sounds like, and I'm not trying to be Ghost's PR man, but you know, the idea that, hey, you want top-notch creative. Here's a group of top-notch creatives that have done stuff you would know, and you can have access to them without all of the extraneous bullshit.
Yeah.
Is that an offer you take as a client, or is that an offer you don't take?
Yeah.
And I think smart clients will say that's an offer I take.
And I've only got a weekend to give you, but you'll crank it out because you know how to do it.
Henry, one of the greatest compliments a client can ever give me is you just told me my story better than I can tell it myself. But the damn truth is that's all I really know how to do really, really well. So I better be able to do that.
Yeah. No, go ahead, G2.
And a lot of it is just really, somebody was talking about, Henry, when you were talking about the client comment, there was some confusion. Really learning how to listen to a client, because we always get so mad at clients because they can't articulate exactly what's bugging them. Well, you have to be able to read the leaves a little bit, or even call back and go, hey, you said a couple things and we just want to check and maybe course correct. There are so many agencies that are afraid to do that. Or because your boss will get pissed if you call.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just ridiculous.
The situation is set up where you can't. But you pointed out earlier that because of our model, we are likely to be in communication with people higher up the chain, because they're going to need to have the ability within their organization to make the call that we should come in. And I think we've all, if you've ever worked on a large accounting agency, we've all suffered through the difference between the annual strategy meeting, in which you're talking to the CMO or the CEO, the top brass, and that meeting is amazing. So much gets done. And then the next Monday, you're sitting there talking to whoever's lowest on that totem pole, and nobody heard the same stuff. and there's all kinds of concerns that aren't really what you're focused on from a business perspective. Somebody's just trying to protect their annual bonus or their promotion chances, whatever it is. It does require you to be talking to the people who can make a call. I've been caught in months of discussion with folks in the middle of the pyramid, and it's only when you finally get the one meeting with the top brass that you go, to be frank, this is the conversation we've been having for 6 months. And they say, okay, then do X. And now you get to
Yeah,
things ahead.
there's a lot of, I guess, the root of this all, or what we're saying in a lot of different ways. There's a ton of inefficiency in the way the typical, not just agency works, because to be fair to
Right,
agencies,
it's on both sides.
agencies reflect the culture that we have at clients. And in that golden age of advertising, right, that we all hearken back to, if there was such a thing, I think one of the differences was a lot of the companies back then were privately held companies. They didn't have huge
Yes.
they didn't have huge marketing departments, and there were people that were empowered to make decisions. Now there's these giant bureaucratic, publicly held companies. They're looking at everything quarter to quarter. The marketing operations are gigantic, with filled with a lot of that middle of the pyramid and down, all trying to justify their existence. It's funny, when we're pitching new business or even our existing clients, I like to listen to the quarterly investor calls where the CEO speaks, and gives the company's goals, and those things are recorded and they're put on the web. And it's funny to me how few people within the agency even know that exists. And
Right.
I'm sure that within the marketing department at that same company, they don't know that it exists, that they can listen verbatim what their CEO is saying the goals of the company are.
Well, I think there's real value in digging deep into things where people don't usually look. And I think one of the most tired tropes I see is the creative who won't go to the focus groups. God damn it, go to the fucking focus group. I've been handed pearls by people who had no idea they just solved a marketing problem. Just for listening. And it might have been the only intelligent thing that was said all night. But you write it down, you go back to the office, you stare at it for 2 days, and all of a sudden you sell a campaign based on an insight blurted out by a consumer.
Yeah, there's an absence, a sad absence of intrepidness and curiosity in some of our agency world. They want everything just kind of handed to them.
Well, I think some of it comes down to that time again as well. Right?
Yep.
The way things are structured. You used to have a day set aside to walk the assembly line.
That's right.
That doesn't, I mean, I've worked on airlines where I couldn't even get a ticket on their plane to fly out to the meeting. Like it's
right,
like you were saying earlier, it's on both ends.
I repositioned a cruise line and never stepped foot on the cruise.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of know the answer to this question, but I think I'm obliged to ask it. Where do you see yourselves? If we invited you back in a year or 2 years, what would much change? Would there be something different? Where do you see yourself in a year or two?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the biggest difference where we might have if we came back in a year or two is we'll have some stories of how it worked. And I am really looking forward to seeing just how much of an impact and the kinds of problems that we're able to solve with clients working this way as Ghost. Because I think right now go ahead.
I'm going to give you a very simple answer. Enjoying what we do or walking away from a relationship that doesn't work. And being adult enough to know that the planets have to align if something's really going to work. But I just think having the confidence to trust the process and to trust I have the right partners who are smart enough to know when the opportunity is there and walk in with a really intelligent solve. I mean, so many people want to say that no good work is being done anymore. And the truth is, it's just not being done at the places where you're used to seeing it done. You look at the things Mischief is doing. They are so strategically, wickedly smart. And I don't see that being given enough credit. I think if you really look at their creative, what makes the creative so fantastic is just how strategic they are.
Sounds like a potential guest, Henry.
But and the other thing I'll say is clients know what they're getting when they go to Mischief.
Yeah.
They know they're not solving problems the same way.
And I'll
So
answer this
speaking,
question in a different way. I'll answer this
Okay,
question in a
G1.
different way. Where do we see ourselves in a year or 2 years is better than we are now. I think one of the things that all three of us have embraced and four of us have embraced is that we're never going to stop learning and we're never going to get to the point where we think we know everything. So we're going to refine this ghost model. We're going to see what works, as G3 has said. What's not working as well, we'll refine it, and in 2 years we'll be a better version of what we are today.
You know, I'm going to ask a question that I think some young creatives might have on their minds, because young creatives coming out of ad school like programs and college programs, looking for their internships and their first jobs. Do you think that's even a possibility with an organization like yours that's trying to be small and strategic and fast moving?
I think if we experienced wild success and we ended up having 3 clients that wanted to be AORs, this idea could evolve into a different business model. Because I do believe in young creatives and their thinking, but I believe you've got to put them in a position to where they have equal footing. It's not about coming in and do the crap we don't want to do. It's like coming in and learn how to really solve problems, and then help teach us how the new mediums can be exploited, because that's where you spend your time.
And
So
I think to that point, all of us have actually spent a lot of time and energy mentoring young talent. It's one of those things that I believe we share and have in common. So it's definitely not something that we turn our noses up at or think doesn't have a place.
Agreed.
Where do, if clients want to reach out to you, how do they get in touch with you?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, Ouija boards have made their way into the mix at some point, but we have easier ways and less scary ways to do it. We have, you can reach us at contact@ghostyouragency.com.
Ghostyouragency.com. We'll include that with links when we post the episode. Ghostyouragency.com. Contact at ghostyouragency.com.
It's contact@ghostyouragency.com. Yes.
Okay. Well, G1, G2, and G3, representatives of this cool new situation called Ghost. Thank you so much for joining Henry and me on the Brief Brothers. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you.
Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff. The weird stuff, Howard.
I know, weird stuff, but hey, this is the Brief Brothers, so we bring it on. He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Ibach, and together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time. Bye-bye.